Hello and welcome to another episode of Attacking Third, a CBS Sports soccer podcast. I'm Sandra, Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports, joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. On today's episode, we have a news update for everybody. There's a ton to chat about. We've got free agency chatter, coaches who are resigning, national champions for the NCAA. There's a lot. So before we get into everything, I just want to let everybody know that you can go download, follow, and listen to us wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to us on YouTube so you never miss out whenever we go live. Leave us a 5-star rating and review if you listen as a podcast. And, we'll go ahead and make sure that we answer your question as part of a mailbag segment. So, I'm sure maybe folks will have questions after this episode because there's so much to talk about, Lisa.
I know there is a lot going on. So much has happened. We just jumped on and we were chatting off mic about how I miss you. We had to catch up a little bit. We talk occasionally in between these episodes, but then we really get to dive in and chat on here. And we don't like to give too much away because we want our conversation on here to be as the first time we're having it so often. But there is so much happening. It's fantastic. I'm excited about it to dive in with you.
I know folks have been keeping an eye on the World Cup, right? So we just want to say that we too were part of that as two people who are with CBS Sports. We've been keeping an eye on all things men's World Cup, and the United States men's national team went ahead and made it to the round of 16. They suffered a 3-1 defeat against the Netherlands, and they are officially out of the World Cup. But we were really excited to sort of watch this and kind of root for them on A3 for a number of reasons, and got to see all of the really cool enthusiasm from so many on the United States women's national team who have been watching and following along as well. All of the reporting coming out and reminding folks, really, because this was all in the CBA, this dual CBA that the two national teams signed, both the men's team and the women's team, about equal pay and how this is going to come to light and how it's going to work. And so all of the excellent refreshing and reminding and reporting that's out there by Lizzie Gibbs and Rachel Bachman about the women getting some of the prize money as well, based on the men's finish. So I think it was a fun time sort of see that. It was fun to root for bonuses a little bit. I know folks out there were finding themselves kind of watching these games and maybe they didn't anticipate initially, but congratulations to them. And we're on the clock now, Lisa. We're watching. We're on the clock. It's less than 300 days before the 2023 World Cup now.
I love that countdown. We are ready for the World Cup 2023, but I think that's so exciting to kind of talk about and think about that the U.S. women's team get a bonus because of this. And there is a point where you're cheering for the money and cheering for that, because I was always cheering for the U.S. men's national team, but then it's just that much sweeter because you think back in the U.S. women, they won the 2015 and the 2019 World Cups, and that was $6 million. Now they get $6.5 million minimum for what they went through. It's for the men, and that's what the women get. It's so good. It's so well deserved. And now the women are next. Our social for Attacking Third was kind of pushing that out there as well. Hey guys, don't fall asleep yet on the US, because the women are coming up in 7 months, 8 months at this point is when everything will be kicking off.
Yeah, I can't wait. I know we've been already doing some teasers and some early World Cup content on our end. We're going to continue to do that as well, but we've got to keep an eye on NWSL off season as well, because that's, of course, we should know that soccer never sleeps, and even if it's off season, there's always going to be some things to chatter about. We're going to dip into the news portion of this, some things that have broken over the last week. We have a coach resignation that we need to talk about a little bit, especially if folks have been very occupied with things like the World Cup or otherwise, and maybe you might have missed this on your radar, but Portland Thorns head coach Rhian Wilkinson resigned, and this is just about a month after winning the NWSL Championship. Made an announcement via her social social media, long, lengthy letter, sort of talking about the details of the reasoning for her resignation. Additional reporting by Meg Linehan in The Athletic on December 2nd, getting into some more details about everything. There was an investigation that took place, and the decision came after Wilkinson was investigated and ultimately cleared by the NWSL and NWSLPA joint investigation team. There was concern about her conduct as a head coach and conduct that she ultimately reported to Portland's HR. And within that, saying that there was no evidence of coercion, abuse, or power imbalance or any other misconduct that was found, and that ultimately no league or team policies were violated. And I think this area is where there's some grayness, I think, for folks who were sort of taking in all the additional details, the additional reporting, The Athletic, and then sort of taking a look at what was in front of them, whether it was the release from the Portland Thorns or the personal statement from Wilkinson, but details within the reporting saying that there was an expression of mutual personal feelings between player and coach, and within that is an automatic power imbalance. And I think this is where Wilkinson had mentioned in terms of losing the locker room. Tough to get that back if players feel that there was a boundary or a line that was crossed. So 1 year with the Portland Thorns and led them to the 2022 NWSL Championship. And I don't know. I think in terms of next steps, Lisa, I'm curious if Wilkinson makes another leap to another team. What does that look like? Because when we saw this news drop, and as we were sort of reacting to it, even just to each other, messages, something that stood out, I think, for the both of us was the fact that there wasn't, because of the investigation kind of clearing any wrongdoing, that there's not an extra consequence that perhaps that we've seen over the course of the last year, where there's no like sort of banishment, like no one's barred from, pursuing work or in the NWSL, that type of consequence doesn't exist. Whereas maybe we saw something like that come out of the Richie Burke investigation, the Cromwell and Green investigation. So I'm curious as to see, Wilkinson and her place in NWSL in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a big question mark at this point because, like Wilkinson's resignation had essentially nothing to do with the results of the investigation, because she was cleared. There was no foul play. There was nothing wrong. But the fact that she lost confidence in the team because of that, she knew that she could never coach again at Portland with this group of players. So I think that that's also something that comes into play. I mean, this story, there are a million different layers to it, to be honest. So I think that her leaving Portland and her resignation in the way that it happened still leaves the door open to other opportunities in the league. I'm going to be honest. I think that it does, with how she handled the situation. Her and the player went to HR. They did an investigation and everything was found out to be okay. But that still proves to be a power imbalance or whatever it may be. And other players didn't feel comfortable with that. So she decided to step away. Now, how she takes to do that in other leagues or in other places in the NWSL, other coaching opportunities, I can't imagine that she'll take a step back, not down the corporate ladder, but a step back in terms of, she was a head coach, right? Like a head coach in the NWSL and ends up winning an NWSL championship. So she's got that on her resume. And I imagine some of the brighter things on her resume outshine this, in which there wasn't protocol for what to do when player and coach, and there are mutual feelings expressed between the two, and kind of how that goes about. Because between Rhian Wilkinson and player defender for Portland Thorns, Emily Menges, they both went to HR at the time. We're not entirely sure. This was happening in mid-October. And then they went to HR and they submitted emails and text messages for this investigation to kind of say that where their situation was, to make sure there was no lines crossed and everything was kosher, and so to say. And the fact that it was, and there was no results of that, but the fact that she knew she had to resign, I mean, there's just so many different layers of it. Even in Meg Linehan's article by The Athletic, Rhian Wilkinson saying that she told club staff members that she was planning to stay on, and they felt uncomfortable, maybe they should move on. So like that's also something that like adds a layer of this into it. Like how now are the players around you and the people you work with around you feeling about this? It's so layered, but it opens another coaching vacancy in the NWSL for a very prolific team in Portland Thorns that are coming off of their third NWSL championship. They've re-signed some incredible players. There's still a lot of positives at Portland, but this also falls at the same time when Portland Thorns is under a bit of stress as a club with their ownership and following the Yates reports, because Paul Riley was a former coach at Portland. I mean, Portland has been in our mouths and the conversation of the news constantly for what feels like a year and a half now.
Yeah, it's been a pretty headline dominating couple of years, right? For this franchise. And I would imagine that for players it hasn't, these last 2 seasons haven't been easy seasons to navigate by any means, and to sort of look at how they kind of capped things off in 2022, maybe sort of having the feeling as if maybe it feels like, yes, there are things burning around this franchise, but perhaps, you know, the players who are on the pitch, the players who are competing together with each other for titles, that appears to be, you know, what I think folks were trying to rally behind, and then to sort of, you know, get the additional reporting that came out and sort of see or read the things that kind of came to light. And, you know, with Wilkinson saying like ultimately the locker room is lost, you can't get that back. And they, as you know, maybe there wasn't a consequence coming out of these joint investigations, but there was a consequence coming out of the locker room, and these players saying, we're asking you for your resignation, and Wilkinson saying, okay, here it is, I have to do that. It's December. I keep having to remind myself of that. It's December of 2022, and there's still some off season to go for this league. And I know there were a certain number of coaching vacancies going into the NWSL off season, and I'm curious. This is something that's the other side of this now that I think you and I are probably going to take a look at or keep an eye on. Who do you get to come in to this position to coach this team? That was part of the question mark around this team last year, and the departure of Mark Parsons. And that was a little different in the sense where they had some time and some buildup to take a look at candidates. They knew that Parsons was eventually going to leave at the end of the season and move on to an opportunity with the Netherlands national team. Now it's a little bit different. They've got a timeline. They've got a very specific kind of timeline in front of them. And, you know, how they're going to fill this position, or how soon. Like, is this something that's going to be?
And the draft is in a month, Sandra.
I was going to say, is this going to be a position that's going to be filled by the time the draft rolls around? If not, I mean, we saw, just for example's sake, we saw a team like the Chicago Red Stars have to navigate large chunk, really all of their offseason, without a head coach in that seat, in that position. That so much of the offseason for that club was without a Petroselli, who did not join the team until mid preseason in February. So it's something to keep an eye on. And I think in terms of this team, even with so much that has come out of this franchise, I don't know how you, from a soccer perspective, look at this team, look at the roster in front of you, and as a coach, not say like that's a team that I want to coach.
Yeah, I mean, even like there are not like millions of coaches to choose from to come in and coach at this level with the pedigree, understanding the league. Because you touched on Mark Parsons, who was with Portland Thorns for years, and he left at the end of last year. He's already back in the NWSL with Washington Spirit. He went to the Netherlands and coached their national team for a handful of months, and then is back in the NWSL. But yeah, I mean, it's not a bad team to go to. You look at Portland, this is an incredibly talented team, a winning culture. They've got a lot of great pieces into place, and they're trying to turn that page, right?
Yeah.
To start a new chapter with this club, getting rid of all the bad stigma that came with it before, all of the coercion and everything that had happened in 2021 with Paul Riley formerly coaching there and the owners and everything. And this is, of course, not on that level of the coach resigning following an investigation where there was no wrongdoings said for the coach. But now it's kind of like, okay, who else do you bring in for this role? Who else is going to step in? It's not a hard sell to get someone to Portland, but what are the choices and who's going to make it there? And also you have about 30 days before the NWSL draft.
Yeah, no, it's we'll see. Young group, ready to, I think, compete and sort of take those steps into this next era of Thorns soccer. Reigning double MVP and Sophia Smith, Morgan Weaver, right? Sam Coffey. I think you look, these are players that you look at and you say you want to build with them
Christine
and continue.
Sinclair. Like, even you have the veterans to help you a little bit and bridge that gap with Christine Sinclair, Becky Sauerbrunn on these rosters.
Yeah, in the midst of a World Cup year too, right? So there will be a lot of attention on the league for sure, in that sense. And it's talking about this in a way where maybe we're trying to talk about these chronologically. Lucy thinks that she's going to coach somewhere again, but maybe has to sit out a while. Maybe, like I said, it's a wait and see approach that we're taking on our end. But the Wilkinson resignation is something that's coming off of news, a big sort of news dump kind of week for Portland Thorns. And then maybe this is out of chronological order, but that Wilkinson resignation came after a certain bit of news out of the Thorns as well. There was pretty big news. Merritt Paulson, majority owner of both the Portland Timbers and the Portland Thorns, he made the announcement that he's going to sell the Portland Thorns franchise, not the Timbers club, and sort of begin the next steps to try and find the new owners for this franchise. And this decision, I think, is something that has sort of been brewing, I think, for a little while. I think public opinion around Paulson and the Thorns specifically has not been good. Right. And there has been a pretty vocal contingent out there that believes, Paulson shouldn't have any affiliation with the club any longer. And a statement was put out, and he said that he's going to go ahead, and he believes it's in the best interest of the Thorns to have a new owner so the club can operate at the league level with a fresh voice and be a driving force for the NWSL. And within that also said that he's pledged $1 million to establish a new player safety office at the league. Commissioner Berman just ultimately reiterating the collaborative efforts between the Thorns and the league for new ownership, saying that she supports the decision to sell the Thorns and the commitment to aid in a smooth transition for a new ownership group in Portland and a $1 million contribution to the league. So a little bit of news within the announcement of the news that Paulson is going to sell the Thorns, that there's going to be a new NWSL player safety department as well.
Yeah, that is also huge. And this comes after it was early October, right? That Merritt Paulson stepped down as the Thorns CEO. And now he's announcing that he's selling it. So this was kind of the next step in this, and really what people were waiting for. They knew he stepped down. That happened immediately following the Yates reports investigation results. And now the fact that that's going to happen, he's been in the NWSL as a founding owner since 2012, but because he was involved so heavily in keeping quiet about Paul Riley and his wrongdoings in coaching around the league and with the players, that is a major reason for this to happen. So it's also couples a little bit with the Rhian Wilkinson news, because in Rhian Wilkinson's article with Meg Linehan in The Athletic about stepping down and resigning, there was talks that the club was under too much stress to bring this to HR, that we couldn't let this go public. We couldn't make it a big deal because of everything that was happening in the ownership with Portland. But I mean, you got to have good bones at a club, right? And I think that this is a great step in doing that, with Merritt Paulson saying, I'm selling it. It has been in his family, right? His dad was an owner. He's a minority owner. It's continuing to kind of trickle down, and the sale of the Portland Thorns is going to be very, very interesting, because we remember Washington Spirit last year sold for $35 million in a sale, which is fantastic. And that's a large sum of money for an NWSL club. And then we look at Portland Thorns and the type of club that this is, with the pedigree. It's 3 trophies. It has the partnership with the Timbers, being in such a soccer city in Portland, Oregon. There's just, this also could have a really large price tag on it, right? And this would be a great club for someone to own. So I think that also kind of sets the standard and sets the bar really high for what the future of Portland Thorns want to be. But now it's finding an owner, right? There's so many more steps to come from it. But the first thing was him announcing that he is going to sell it for sure.
Yeah, there's similar to all the other news that we've been chatting about this morning. I mean, there's a lot of layers to this as well. You know, even though there was the announcement about the decision to find new ownership for the Thorns. Still a lot of conversations and questions about what that's going to look like. As Paulson said, I'm not selling the Timbers. I'm only selling the Thorns, and how that dynamic will continue to exist in the future, because these are unlike the Spirit sale that we did a lot of covering of during the 2021 season. This is a little different. That's a club that just was an independent club on its own, operating on its own legs. And then you've got a Thorns team that kind of came up with a Timber side. And this was 2 teams in 2 professional leagues, linked by, training schedules and stadiums, facilities, etc. So
ticket sales, game schedules, training schedules, right? Ticket sales. There's so much else. The game day operations, like everything goes into it.
Yeah. So it's gonna, like you said, it's gonna be something to pay attention to and see what that looks like in the future, because there's no timeline on this. That's the other thing in this announcement, that there's not a timeline to have a new ownership group, by the start of 2023, let's say. That wasn't listed within any of the releases or the statements, and it was placed in there, I think, on purpose, because I think this is the type of sale that's going to probably take some time. I think if you're trying to look and find the right owners for this specific franchise. And it wasn't just Portland who had an announcement in terms of potential change at the majority ownership stake level. The Chicago Red Stars also in a similar position. Additional reporting by Sportico saying that Chicago Red Stars owner Arnim Whistler had hired a third party to help begin the next steps of selling his majority ownership stake. Had hired Inner Circle Sports and Investment Bank to go ahead and help that process. That this was something that was ultimately confirmed to Chicago Red Stars shareholders across the board. So you're talking just hours after the initial Thorns announcement by Paulson, and then there was the reporting on the Chicago Red Stars side of things as well. So it was a little bit of a pivot. Right. We're seeing sort of these next steps compared to October for both of these franchises. I think for Chicago, you had in October, when all of the Yates report was made public, Whistler previously issued a statement saying that, hey, I'm going to step away from decision making within the organization. And then the Chicago Red Stars board said, actually, no, you're going to be removed, and we're going to start begin these conversations of removing and finding new ownership. And now this is just sort of makes it official. It's sort of seems like we've been talking about next steps for these two particular franchise and their ownership for a couple of months now, right? We're going October to November, and now here we are in December chatting about it. But similar to Paulson and the Thorns, there was no timeline that was placed on this announcement as well. That there's no timeline in terms of what a sale of Whistler's majority shares is going to look like. So I think for me, and I think I'm sure many out there, what does that mean for these two franchises, right? So you've got two franchises who have been in headlines across the last 2 years in NWSL, and then in October, the Yates report, all over the Yates report as well. So what does 2023 look like for these two franchises, as there is no timeline for a new stake and new ownership to be found and sold to new groups? So I think that's something that I think people are going to continue to try to keep an eye on and take a look at, because I think we saw with the Spirit, just to use that example, because it's our most recent example, that wasn't something that happened overnight, that there was a lot of back and forth that took place with that, and a number of parties making sure that they had their respective side heard and their piece was said. So this isn't something I anticipate is going to happen overnight. I wouldn't be surprised if we have another update on either of these two franchises in terms of the process of their decision to sell, because the framework is in place already. We know sort of the key dates that are going to happen for NWSL in 2023 in terms of when preseason is going to start, when the regular season is going to kick off, right? We know the draft is going to happen on, in January. There's going to be the Challenge Cup within the regular season. There's a World Cup. Like, there's all these things that are going to be happening in 2023. So I would imagine that that's the reasoning to not have such a timestamp, a deadline on this type of process. But what that looks like for both of these clubs in the future, I think there's still some question marks around that.
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks, but and you mentioned how the process is not going to happen overnight. Even you think about the Yates investigation and when that started, when those results were released, early October, early days of October, Chicago players, Portland players making statements saying that they want their owners to find a new owner and to sell the team. So that happened in Chicago, October 10th. And now it comes early December. So nearly 2 months later is Arnim Whistler saying, yes, am going to now sell this club, because he was part of the problem, ignoring or minimizing complaints from players about coaches' behavior. And the fact that I touched on $35 million for Washington Spirit last year when it was sold to Michelle Kang. The number has been floated around $50 million figure for the Portland Thorns. How does Chicago fall into that? And we talked about Portland and how they do have the Timbers and they have Providence Park and they have a lot there. In Chicago, it looks a little bit different because they're not so associated with the Chicago Fire, and they play in SeatGeek Stadium. But how does that look moving forward? And it comes down a little bit of pressure on the NWSL board as to making sure you find an owner that is in line with everything that the league is in line with. Yes, the morals and the values and growing the league, but also there are new broadcast rights deals to be negotiated with in the upcoming year. There is going to be 2 new expansion sides coming into the league in future years. So how are they all on the same page, right? You don't look to get an owner that's going to be there for 3 to 5 years. You want an owner that's going to be there for the long term, that wants to invest in the club, in the city, and in the league. So there are big question marks around how this is going to happen. No timeline for this either as what's going on, but these are the first steps. There are plans in place now and people in place now to keep things running, but we'll see.
If people are only listening to podcasts, I don't mean to smile because I think this is a funny or jokey situation, but it's just, we keep talking about this, and I feel over the last 2 months, it's like, here's the next step, and then here's the next step, and then here's the other next step, and then here's the next step. And it's like the last 2 months has sort of felt like just sort of dipping your toes into the water to sort of see what would be acceptable by public opinion, and it just was not working out, I think, for either of these owners, in terms of, I'm going to take a step back from decision making. No, that's I'm going to take a step back from day to day. No, that's not enough. I'm good, so it's like to sort of have this sort of finally feels like that real actual next step. It sort of feels
right, exactly.
Okay, here it is.
And I think it's important, Lucy, shout out to you in our chat joining us live on YouTube, saying that Gotham has all those big names investors. And you look at Angel City, they have a number of big name investors. Gotham is doing the same thing. So that's also a direction that we could see maybe Chicago go in, to have a number of different investors, not just one put their name on it, but see who we can get, because Chicago's a big city, right? There's a lot of people that would be interested in this, that could throw some dollar bills at this club and see how they can advance it and accelerate the league. There are many different options to go for it. There are already people interested in the sale of the Portland Thorns. Now it's Chicago as well, and seeing how they can market these two different clubs in these cities.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm sure there's going to be tons to talk about as we keep our eyes on what's going to happen with this process. But listen, that's just news in terms of what is going to impact these clubs right now during the offseason. There's still free agency that we have to talk about, Lisa. There's some movement that has finally happened, and we're excited to talk about it. We're going to take a quick break before we take a dive into that.
Don't stop watching. Christian Pulisic.
Outstanding from the American.
All skill, all class, and all American at work across the pond.
Pulisic finds the net.
The UEFA Champions League. Stream Chelsea matches live February on Paramount Plus.
All right, NWSL Free Agency. We've got some news. We've got some movement. We got to talk about some players who have recently announced their new clubs, because the free agency list was nice and lengthy. There's a ton of players that were listed and that we've been talking about and wanting to keep an eye on. And we finally got some action across the board. And listen, it started with Gotham, so of course it's going to stay with Gotham. Gotham really kind of setting the tone for free agency movement in 2022 off season, but also making another announcement. They started with Kelly O'Hara, and then they made the move for Abby Smith. And then all of a sudden they said, we're not done. Mm-hmm. We went ahead and picked up Kristen Edmonds and signed her to a 2-year deal. The New Jersey native returning home.
Yeah, this is huge. A 2-year contract for Kristen Edmonds, coming out of Kansas City, a veteran, a leader in every team that she goes to. And this is a player that's also pretty versatile on the field, right? You look at this Gotham side and where some of the holes in their roster are, maybe in the midfield, maybe defensive midfield as well, kind of where they can spruce up. And Kristen Edmonds is a player that you can play higher up the pitch in midfield. She can play as an outside back role, a defensive mid role. She can also play as a wing back, right? Get in those miles up and down the sides of the pitch. So it kind of goes to show how Juan Carlos Samaros wants to play with this Gotham side, what he wants to do. But yeah, I mean, Gotham is bulking up, and I think this is huge. Edmonds is one of the older veteran players in this league, 35 years old, but she brings this energy to every team that she goes to. We had the pleasure of speaking with her at the start of last season with Kansas City about what they were doing during preseason, how they were going to make this year different. And they went all the way to the NWSL Championship. So she's got the experience. She's got the understanding of what it takes to turn a team around from last to first, like she did with Kansas City. Huge, huge, huge get for Gotham. I love this. I am just very curious to see where she'll fit in onto the pitch and kind of what role she will play during those games. And of course, we won't know that such early days. Preseason hasn't even started yet. No talks of that. But of course, I'm already looking at rosters, understanding formations, what's going to happen where, because this is one that I'm really, really excited to see how Edmonds fits in.
That's what we got to do here. We got to think about it like that in the long term or in the near future, and what that's going to look like for that team. Look, we were already chatting about it off mic. Again, when that news dropped, we were messaging each other. We're like, how's this going to work? Like, what's that going to look like? Listen, you're my witness, Lisa, because you were the one I was texting about it. My very first thought was like, well, how if the goal is to maybe slot Edmonds along that back line somewhere, What is that going to look like? What is that going to mean? Are they going to bring back somebody like Estelle Johnson? Is that going to be too crowded? And look what happened. There's more news out of Gotham this time. Estelle Johnson utilizing her free agency and making a move to North Carolina Courage. She is joining the Courage on a guaranteed contract, and we're going to see some new looks on that back line for the Courage. Listen, this is a team that struggled, I think, in this first half of the regular season of 2022. I think defensively, they were still trying to work some things out. Obviously, they made that push in the second half of the season to try to keep things interesting in the playoff picture. A lot of that coming out of the fact that they had some really good offensive and attacking pieces. But what is that back line going to look like in 2022? And maybe this is one of those first pieces for them.
Yeah, I think this is also so huge for North Carolina to pick up a player like Estelle Johnson. She dealt with some injuries last year, so it's kind of how she can manage that moving forward. But this is a North Carolina side that knows how to win, and to kind of buckle down their back line with a player like Johnson is going to be huge for them. Finally, like, we're getting some moves out of Gotham, right? We were like, Gotham is just stacking it up. What else is going to happen? I mean, I like to think that we really pushed the league last week when we were like, we are just waiting for free agency trades to happen. And then bam, they all happened because I love this trade for Estelle Johnson. I think that she could get good minutes in North Carolina, play some good times there, really contribute to their back line and get North Carolina back in the upper half of the table, right? This was a team that had a roller coaster of a year last year, winning the Challenge Cup early in 2022, and then finishing the bottom half of the table at the end of the regular season. So defensively, you've got to shore things up, and this is a great way to do it, getting Johnson.
Yeah, absolutely. It was cool to sort of see these movements, these signings get announced, because we were like, yes, finally, this feels like what, we wanted free agency to feel like. We wanted to see, players, make those decisions for themselves and make the leap to a new team, because that kind of shows that, in terms of this first ever free agency period, there's a real responsibility on franchises out there to make sure that they're putting together a good pitch to these players, because these are players. Some of them have played a full decade in this league, right? Some of them have played 8, 7, 6, at least 6 years minimum of service in this league. So they have heard it, seen it, felt it all. So it is absolutely on the clubs to make sure that when they are in, the same room or on the phone or on a Zoom, whatever, making these pitches to these players, that it's going to be on the player to ultimately get to make that decision for what's best for them. So it was cool to sort of see free agency kick off the way that it did, but then it kind of tapered off a little bit, and we sort of saw players kind of making those negotiations with their current clubs and kind of accepting those contract, those extended offers. They said, okay, we're going to accept that. We saw Yuki Nagasato and Aaron Wright still sign back with Chicago. We saw Mackenzie Doniak is going to still stay in San Diego with the Wave, and Angel City finally making it official with Jasmine Spencer as well, saying, hey, we're going to, keep this player in Angel City as well. But listen, we're talking about the West Coast teams because they weren't done making, some noise. San Diego Wave signing up not one, but 2 free agents. They welcomed Rachel Hill and Danny Colaprico to San Diego Wave. And listen, I think those are great pickups for this team moving forward.
Oh my gosh, these are incredible pickups. You look at Rachel Hill, former forward with Chicago Red Stars. This is a player that took the long and hard road, right, to get to the top and starting games and playing consistent minutes. And she fought really hard for that. It did not come easy, and it never does for these players. But this is one that finally made her name known as a namestay in Chicago about what she could do, how she can contribute on the pitch. She's a great forward that learned a lot playing in front of players like Danny Colaprico, Vanessa DiBernardo, alongside Mallory Pugh up top, even Mackenzie Doniak, right? The former Chicago player. So this is a great get for San Diego to pick up a player like Rachel Hill, a 2-year contract through 2024. And then Danielle Colaprico. This is a lockdown midfielder that you know exactly what you're going to get day in and day out. The consistency is unmatched by any other player in the league by Danielle Colaprico. This is a really, really big get. 2-year contract through 2024. She's a veteran with 8 years of experience, all of them at Chicago as well, which I think is a really good shakeup for Dani and what she can do now heading to the West Coast with a San Diego Wave team that broke records in attendance throughout the playoffs, making it through the playoffs, hosting a playoff game, winning a playoff game. This is a team that knows what they want. They know how to win, and they're doing that by grabbing up some of these incredible players. It's really, really huge for San Diego. And on the flip side of it, this is a huge loss for the Chicago Red Stars. This is massive because Chicago Red Stars came out and made an announcement that they would not be re-signing Rachel Hill, Dani Colaprico, Morgan Gautreau. That was all in one announcement. And when that came out, it was like, wow, these are going to be holes that Chicago needs to fill. You look at Morgan Gautreau and you look at Dani Colaprico, those are midfielders that have played so consistently. And for how many years at that club together, just really helping to shape the identity of Chicago and what they were going to do on the pitch, leading them to year after year after year after year, a consistent record of getting into the postseason, making it to the NWSL Championship in 2021. It was all because of players like that. So it's a bit of a rebuild now for Chicago. And
I would argue that it's been a rebuild for a couple of years now.
But this is their midfield. Midfield is part of your team that maybe you look to establish first, right? Or you get that striker and then you build around. And now that they have lost their midfield, that's a huge spot to rebuild, and that doesn't happen overnight.
Listen, I think that the Wave, and, with head coach Casey Stoney, I think her immediate adaptability into coaching into the NWSL, just sort of absorbing everything, and sort of when that final whistle happened, like kind of pull the plug in the postseason on their entire 2022. I think she immediately was like, we've got work to do in this offseason to try to ensure that we make good moves to remain competitive, right? Because they've already set they set a bar for themselves as a franchise, as a club, getting in here in their inaugural season and going and making a run all the way to the semifinals. So what is that going to look like in 2023 for the Wave? How are they going to try to keep excelling on the pitch? And a big part of that is making sure that you're getting players who can not only fit into your system, but be able to take it to that next level for you. And I think in getting these types of players, whether it's a Rachel Hill, who has really shown during her later time in Chicago that she is one of the more versatile players in the league, sort of, starting as a forward option with Orlando to really being utilized as sort of as a wing back with the Red Stars. And then you have somebody like Dani Colaprico, who's an experienced midfielder in this league. And I think that was one of the things when we saw with the Wave is they were putting together the roster, we were like, who is going to take care of things in the midfield for them? And they didn't really have that type of presence. And that's going to change. That's what this type of signing is.
This is huge
for the Wave. You're talking to Sandra, okay? I know what Dani Colaprico is going to do for another team's midfield. That's how good of a player Colaprico is, that you can take this player, insert them into a new team and a different type of system, and it will automatically unlock some things or answer some questions that they may have had about themselves on the team. I think they're going to not look completely different, but I think they're going to look a little bit more stable, a little bit more calm at times, as they have somebody like Colaprico in the middle, someone who can possess, someone who can, win balls. So I think it's a great signing. I think in terms of, we'll probably look back on this free agency period and maybe throw out some grades, but as of right now, this is absolutely a home run at Colaprico to the Wave.
It totally is. And for Casey Stoney, I know you talked about how well she's doing adjusting and gathering information and gathering players that'll work well in her system. And we're heading into a World Cup here, and you have to look at that as a coach and kind of say, how do I get some depth on my bench that doesn't hurt the players that aren't starting all the time, but only helps them when the World Cup is coming. And a player like Dani Colaprico that can slot into the midfield from day one and be that anchor, be that leader that you need, because now it kind of ties things together. You look at the bookends for San Diego. They have Kaylin Sheridan, Canadian goalkeeper. She's going to be gone. You've got Alex Morgan up top. She's going to be gone. So now it adds so much more stability in the midfield, right? And that's what Dani Colaprico does. Huge. This is so huge for San Diego.
We're talking about teams who are, perhaps trying to build their spines, right? And we're starting to see some things out of God, and we're starting to see some things out of the Wave. I think it's a massive, massive save for them. I think when I saw, and I think it's probably the signing. It's the one signing I think we've gotten so far right now in this free agency period that says a little bit more than it really does just on the pitch. Yes, it says a whole lot about what it's, what San Diego is trying to do and what they want to do on the pitch, but it also says a lot, for the league off of the pitch as well. That was my main reaction to this. I think I said something randomly on my Twitter, and I was like, my favorite part of a signing like this is that it came out of free agency, that this is a type of signing that shows what free agency can be and what it could look like and what it can mean to players in the league. This wasn't a trade that took place where, a club could sort of spin a narrative on it and say, hey, look at what we did for this player. We did this to accommodate them, right? It removes that. But what it does instead is it ensures that a longtime player like Colaprico can not only get a fresh start, but get a new contract, right? And not just go to any team, but another team that's essentially a contender, right? A competitor. So I think that was one of the other really exciting parts for me about a signing like this. And I would anticipate that we're going to get more of those, because there were a number of free agents on this free agent list that we knew probably were not going to return to their former clubs. And I think when you look club by club by club, you see the Red Stars, and they had a ton of free agents. I believe they had 7, most of like any other team. So there's just no way this franchise was going to ensure that all 7 of these players were going to return, because free agency is different than just sort of negotiating with a player outside of something that has never existed in the league before this offseason free agency period. So, I'm looking forward to seeing where some of the other midfielders land, because, the team has already put out announcement that certain players would not, return to the Red Stars, whether it was a Colaprico or a Morgan Gautrat. So that's the next move. Like, what midfield out there is going to try to ensure that they're going to bulk up, their middle third of the pitch. And I think when you're looking at all of these midfielders out of Chicago, any one of them could sort of slot in and change and unlock some things for certain clubs in 2023, whether that's a Gautrat or whether that's a Di Bernardo. We'll see. I think you look at somebody like a Di Bernardo, who came off of this fantastic season in 2022 and showed everybody, listen, you can put me anywhere in the middle third, because I navigated the majority of 2022 as a 6, which is not something that we had seen from Di Bernardo too much in her career. She's typically higher up the pitch. So I think not only do you have really, really good veteran experienced midfielders coming out of the Red Stars, these are players that you could sort of play in those 6 roles or in those dual pivots, and players that you could put across that middle third. Like I said, as soon as you sign a player like that, it's absolutely going to be a game changer for some of these teams.
Exactly. And these are players that have been with Chicago their whole careers, most of them. Vanessa Di Bernardo, right? She was drafted in 2014 directly to Chicago. You look at Dani Colaprico, drafted in 2015, went to Chicago then. These are players that also know how to build a winning culture where they are and establish themselves. So the fact that they have announced and the club has announced that they're not re-signing, I think is huge. And that's, like you said, it speaks to the free agency of it, because these are players that probably could have stayed in Chicago if they wanted to, especially Di Bernardo, right? She's a Naperville, Chicago native. So she's from there and she played her whole professional career there. So this is huge for her about picking her destiny. I mean, when we talked to Jill Loyden last week about this and we asked her, a former professional player, U.S. women's national team goalkeeper, about how important this is, she said not only do these players get to pick where they want to live, right, in the country, but who they want to work with, what coaches they like, what formations they like, what teams are going to be most conducive to them. And this is a direct result of that with the free agency.
Yeah, 100%. I think, listen, we saw with the arrival of the two California teams and that expansion draft that we saw in 2021's offseason. Listen, these were two teams that players were absolutely interested in fielding calls from and having those conversations about making mutual moves between two clubs to get players to California. So, of course, it absolutely showed us that these are franchises and destinations where players wouldn't mind going to or playing for or being a part of. But what I think what free agency is continuing to show is that it's shining light on the fact that there are clubs who are going to have to do the work to ensure that their franchise is a place that players want to play in and want to be a part of. So it's showing us where players want to go, and it's definitely showing us where players do not want to be at this moment. And I think, is it a hard question? Is it a hard reality? But that's what it is right now. So the Red Stars are going to have to try to do their due diligence to ensure that they change that for themselves. So, I think getting an Aaron Wright, getting a Yuki Nagasato, I think is a couple good steps for them in this free agency period. But this is a team that has struggled to, really attract, certain talents or big names for the last couple of seasons. And it looks like it might continue in the near future as well. So it's something we'll keep an eye on. Free agency is not over. I'm sure we're going to get some more news and player movement to talk about. But look, before we close out, we absolutely got to show some love to the NCAA Division I national champions, UCLA. We had a great preview episode. Shout out to Joe Lorden for joining us, talking about the College Cup. It ended up being UCLA taking on North Carolina and Cary NC at WakeMed Soccer Plex. What a game. Came from behind. Massive.
This was amazing. I mean, the semifinals were also fantastic, watching that these two teams play, because initially it was UCLA against Alabama, the debutantes, and UCLA dominates 3-0. They shut out Alabama, and then UNC taking down the reigning NCAA national champions, Florida State University, 3-2. There were goals galore in that match. So because the two winners ended up scoring 3 and 3 in those semifinals, I was like, great, we're going to get some fantastic action in this championship. We go through the first 45 minutes and it's 0-0. We're tied at 0 at halftime between UNC and UCLA, but it was not due to lack of action. There was some incredible saves throughout this match. There was some really great opportunities, some great moments from these players. Ultimately, UCLA coming away with the win, but it was a long game for UCLA to come into this one, because 0-0 at halftime. UNC ends up getting 2 goals in the second half. So they're up. North Carolina is winning 2-0 at this point. They've got this in the bag. They're ready to go. 80th minute hits. You think, all right, 10 minutes left of this match. Let's get the confetti going. We'll get the t-shirts out and ready to rock and roll. And before you know it, UCLA gets one back. It's now 2-1 around the 80th minute. Just after the 80th minute, we come down to 30 seconds left in this game. UCLA gets a corner kick. I believe there was 16 seconds left on the clock. And Riley Turner for UCLA equalizes with a header goal on the corner kick. So, of course, we're headed into overtime. We're in the midst of the World Cup, where we just saw overtimes happening in the round of 16, penalty kicks. We're like, let's just finish this game in regulation. That's all I was thinking. Come on, someone get a goal so we don't go to penalty kicks. And at the end of the second overtime, UNC gets an incredible opportunity. UCLA ends up saving it off the goal line at this point. That was incredible. With 3 minutes left in overtime, Reyes gets the game-winning goal. Incredible for her. It was gritty. It was well fought. This game had a little bit of everything. I loved it.
Oh, no, I loved it. Absolute scenes. I loved seeing Reyes get that moment, not just for herself, but obviously with her teammates, and you could see how much it meant, to her personally. Tears. Yeah, and her, and what it means, for her and her journey, right, as a collegiate player, and what that could mean for her and in the next phase of her career. Has already represented Mexico on the international stage, and it was just really nice to see. I think for me, on a personal note, you love to see it. Love to see the success of young players, and I'm always going to be rooting for anybody who's got the responsibility of both representing at the collegiate game or in a professional league, and who's also representing on the Mexican national team. So I'm with it, and it was really great to see. Well, I was unprepared for the emotion, but I'm glad we got to see it anyway. It was really nice.
How could you be so unprepared for that? Because it's like, I mean, it was beautiful to see, right? Like Rhea ends up getting the game-winning goal. Her team wins the national championship. She is a senior. That was her last kick of her collegiate career, and it ends up being the game-winning goal for her. And that moment makes me come to tears, because how special is that for her? This was also the very first time a team had ever come back from a 2-goal deficit to win the national championship. And it was just the second time the Bruins had even seen a 2-score deficit this season. Fantastic for them. Fantastic for their head coach in her very first season. Marguerite Awazaza, fantastic for her, coming from Stanford and taking over UCLA, taking them to the College Cup and winning it all. It gets me so jazzed up. I love college football.
Yeah, we'll revisit right next year when we all go through this again and see if we get some new teams involved in the mix, or if UCLA goes on a repeat. We'll keep an eye on it, and we just want to congratulate Diana Matheson and Christine Sinclair. They had an appearance on CBC's The National on Monday night to make an announcement that a new domestic professional women's league will arrive in Canada in April of 2025. So not a ton of details at this moment. It is still an unnamed league that will feature 8 teams, I believe, is the goal. Vancouver Whitecaps and Calgary Football Hills Soccer Club are already the 2 teams who have committed to having teams in this league. But the goal, I think, is to sort of take the footprint or blueprint of NWSL and try to make something come to life in Canada. Supposedly there's going to be at least one Canadian women's national team member on each team. And it's really cool to sort of see somebody like Matheson, who was such a staple for Canada's women's national team and in NWSL for such a long time. But the league is being built by Matheson and her business partners at Project 8 Sports, and Christine Sinclair is on board as well, but as an official advisor. So still some more things to come down the pipeline for that, I'm sure, but very cool to see.
Yeah, this is huge. I mean, we speak with so many Canadians and internationals about why they don't have a women's professional league domestically in Canada. So this is really huge for them. Of course, we're still a couple of years out from that. I know Quinn, who currently plays for OL Reign and Canadian National, was like, what, I gotta wait, I can't retire yet. Saying that they put out a statement on their Twitter saying that, like, what, I can't retire yet, I gotta wait for this to come around so I can play at home. It's huge. The goal, I believe, is for them to bring over half of the 100 Canadians that are currently playing abroad. There's a lot of them in the NWSL, a lot of them overseas in Europe, playing all over the world. So this is fantastic. Yeah. I mean, even like you think about NWSL getting a team in LA and Kristen Press and so many of those players saying, wow, I get to play at home. This is like, these players can't even play in their country for domestic. Like, this is fantastic to see. Grow the game, keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be cool. I think the idea of having at least one Canadian player on each team would be huge. I mean, how cool would it be to have somebody like Quinn be the face of a particular franchise and sort of have their name and their face all over it, and sort of be the player that whichever of the 8 teams wants to build around, right? So we'll see. I guess they still have to, like, it's unnamed. They still need to come up with a name. We still need to see like the division and if it's semi-professional, fully professional, right? See all those.
Everyone knows that the name is like one of the hardest parts of this. And I know that maybe there was like some talks or some rumors. Fans were saying, hey, like, do something like American other professional sports do, and let's get 1 or 2 teams in Canada that just join the American League. Now becomes a North American League. But no, this is so much better. Canada deserves their own league. They have enough players. They have enough fans. Let's make it happen. I'm thrilled for them.
Same. Thanks, everybody, for listening to Attacking Third. That's all we got for you right now. Hefty episode, but listen, we had to make sure that you got all the news and all the reaction. Download, follow, listen to us anywhere you get your podcast. You can watch us too. Subscribe to us on YouTube to get alerts whenever we do go live. YouTube.com/Attacking Third. Reminder, if you have questions for us, you can go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review with your question, and we will answer it. We'll be back with so much more. For Sandra, Herrera, and Lisa Roman, this was Attacking Third.